Hi there, my name is Matti Sulanto. I'm a photographer and a Lumix ambassador based in Helsinki, Finland. In this video I'm going to cover this Panasonic Leica 12 to 60mm zoom lens. This 12 to 60mm is the premium kit lens that Panasonic offers with their Lumix cameras. I'll put the full name somewhere on the screen because it's a bit of a mouthful and I probably forget something if I try to say it in one take. I've had this lens for some time, but I've mainly used it for video. In my last video I covered the main differences between a prime lens and a zoom lens. And I thought it would be a nice sequel or an extension to that video if I covered this lens separately, because I used this zoom lens as an example in that previous video. But before I get carried away and talk too much again, let's take a look at some pictures that I shot on this lens. The focal length of this lens is from 12 to 60mm, and that's really nice and versatile range. And I think it's the sweet spot, or almost an extended sweet spot for the most of us. 12mm is really nice, pretty wide, and you get that wide angle look into your pictures with that. And on the other hand, 60mm is clearly a telephoto, and you start to get that compressed telephoto look at 60mm. The maximum aperture is not constant. It varies from f2.8 at 12mm to f4 at 60mm. I'm not a huge fan of this kind of design, but it saves weight and size. This lens is about the same size as the Olympus 12 to 40mm f2.8, but this has 20mm more reach. However, the downside is that whenever you are in a situation where you need to use manual exposure, maybe you are shooting with studio strobes or flashes or some other reason where you are in full manual mode, then the maximum usable aperture is f4, because otherwise you'd be changing your exposure every time you changed your zoom setting. But for general photography, the variable maximum aperture is not a big downside, and I guess the smaller size and weight is a big plus in many situations too. But now I've been talking too much already. Let's take a look at some pictures that I shot on this zoom lens. The weight of this lens is about 355 grams, including the hood, which is also included in the price. And the filter thread is 62mm. And the mechanical construction looks really solid and nice. The outer barrel is metal, as well as the zoom and focus ring, but the inner barrel is some sort of plastic. And there is a little bit of a free play here when the lens is at 60mm fully extended. But it's nothing major, and it doesn't feel like a cheap design or anything like that. There's also a switch for manual focus here on the side of the lens, and also another switch for the optical image stabilizer. And yes, this lens has an optical image stabilizer, which makes it really useful even on some cameras that don't have the IBIS. But combined with something like the G9 or some other Lumix camera that has the IBIS, it makes really powerful image stabilizer that allows you to take handheld shots even at 1 second or even longer exposures if your hands are steady. There's really not much to say about the autofocus of this lens. It's just really fast and accurate. And you probably won't need manual focus very often, but if you happen to need it, there is a manual focus ring which has nice resistance to it, but it doesn't offer the same feedback as a real mechanical manual focus. But this is typical for any fly-by-wire manual focus system. What about the optical performance then? In that regard, I think there's very little to complain about with this lens. It's really sharp and contrasty throughout the whole range, but if you really want to nitpick, I think you will find that there's a sweet spot from about 25 millimeters to about 45 millimeters. But don't get me wrong, even at 12 millimeters or at 60 millimeters, you should have no trouble getting really nice and sharp pictures on this lens. Okay, I'm not gonna say much about distortions, vignetting, chromatic aberrations and other optical flaws that are corrected in camera on all Micro Four Thirds cameras. When those software corrections came to digital cameras something like 10 years ago, I was against it because they potentially degrade the image quality. However, I have changed my mind because in real life photography you can't really see that degradation so much or maybe not at all. You can probably measure it in lab, but laboratory tests are never the same thing as the real life photography. I still have one more set of pictures left shot on this lens, so let's take a look at those now. At this point, it's good to remind you that you can also subscribe to my channel and tap the bell icon down there so you won't miss any of my future videos. I'll post a new video on Tuesdays and on Fridays. As I said at the beginning, this is sold as a kit with many Lumix camera bodies, but you can also buy this separately for about 1,000 euros or dollars, and that makes this not exactly a cheap lens. And you probably get better value for your money if you buy this as a kit. This lens has good build quality, weather sealing, optical image stabilizer, and very solid optical performance. So I think this lens is worth taking a look if you're looking for a premium class standard zoom lens. As I said in my previous video, I'm not a big fan of standard zoom lenses, and a zoom like this that covers from wide angle to a telephoto, it's a bit ambiguous. It's really hard to get to know this kind of lens no matter how long and how much you use it, compared to a prime lens that only covers one focal length. However, because I haven't used this lens much for photography, I still had fun shooting on this lens, and I think from now on I'll take it out more often also for photography. But what about you? What are your thoughts about standard zoom lenses? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.